called Science Policy, Communication, and Public Opinion, Genetically Modified Organisms. This summer, I worked in both the office of U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow and with renowned nutritionist Catherine Talmadge. Senator Stabenow is a Democrat from Michigan, and she's been in the Senate since 2001. She's also the chairwoman of the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, and she will become the senior senator from Michigan when Carl Levin retires after this term. As part of the Stabenow office, I worked with the healthcare legislative team. My legislative duties involved going to briefings and writing memos of those briefings. The purpose of a briefing is to inform policymakers about issues that are important to your community. At a briefing, there's a panel of experts in the field, and each panel member will give a short presentation with time for questions and answers at the end. It is so important that scientists are able to translate the language of hard science into something that non-science people can both understand and apply to legislation and policy. This is why being able to speak to a wide variety of audiences is so extremely valuable and critically important. After going to these briefings, I would write memos for my legislative team, which would help them to provide the senator with the most accurate and up-to-date information about healthcare issues. Here is a memo I wrote about a women's health briefing, and over here is a slightly creepy picture I took of Frances Collins, who's the NIH director who I saw at a briefing about the importance of genomics research to the U.S. economy. It was particularly interesting to see Dr. Collins speak because he discussed how the sequester has forced the NIH to give out 700 fewer grants than they normally would, which I know has hurt a lot of labs nationally and a lot of labs here at Georgetown. I'm using genetically modified organisms to bridge the gap between what I did in the policy world and what I did in the nutrition world this summer. Genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, are basically organisms whose genomes have been altered unnaturally. This picture shows one way that GMOs could be made. Say you wanted to make a plant that was drought resistant. You could take a gene for drought resistance, shown here in pink, and combine that on a plasmid, which is just a small circular piece of DNA, with a marker gene, shown here in blue. You would then transform those plasmids into plant cells, where if the transformation is successful, those plasmid genes would incorporate into the plant genome. You can then grow up seedlings from those plant cells, and the seedlings that express the marker gene, in this case the one here that's blue, shows that your transformation was successful and that your gene, like the gene for drought resistance, is also in the seedling. From that seedling, you can grow the transgenic plants and harvest and produce GM seeds. It was very exciting to be a part of the Senate this summer because in June, after a lengthy debate, the Senate passed the Farm Bill. As chairwoman of the Ag Committee, Senator Stabenow was instrumental in both writing and passing the Farm Bill. For those of you who don't know, the Farm Bill is a huge piece of legislation that covers a wide variety of food-related programs, including food stamps, SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, crop insurance, subsidies, conservation, and commodity programs. An amendment was proposed but ultimately failed that would make it legal for states to require special GMO labeling. The amendment failed in part due to pressure from large biotech and food companies like Monsanto, and partly because it would simply reaffirm rights that states already have. Another piece of really interesting GMO legislation that was hotly contested this summer was the so-called Monsanto Protection Act, or MPA. The MPA was a policy rider that was slipped into an unrelated spending bill by the House earlier this year. That simply means that it was an unrelated clause in a bill that most policymakers probably didn't even realize they were passing when they voted for this bill. As you can see, the MPA would bar federal judges from passing injunctions on the sale and planting of GMO seeds, even if they are found to be harmful. As you can imagine, the public outcry about the possibility of extending the MPA legislation was explosive. The MPA is set to expire later this year in September, and it really exemplifies the intense debate over GMOs and our right to know what is in our food. GMO labeling currently falls to the state governments, 26 of which are currently pursuing GMO labeling legislation. Recently, my wonderful boss, Catherine Talmadge, was interviewed on CNN about GMOs. I helped her research and write a follow-up article, the interview about the pros and cons of GMOs, that was recently published on livescience.com. As you can see, there are many pros and many cons to GMOs, which is why this issue is so controversial. Some of the pros include that GM plants can be engineered to increase their yield, which can make the food supply less expensive. Genes for pest resistance mean that less pesticides are used, and genes for drought resistance can make agriculture possible in a wide variety of environments in which it was formerly very, very difficult, like arid environments. As many pros as there are just as many cons. Although no long-term studies have confirmed that GMOs pose a risk to human health, no long-term studies have been performed, period. So as for the long-term risks, we don't really know what they are, and if they exist, how severe they might be. GMOs can also cause environmental damage in two ways. Firstly, as exemplified by a rogue strain of Monsanto GM wheat that was inexplicably found in a field in Oregon earlier this year, GMOs may have the capacity to become invasive species. Secondly, the increased yield and the cheaper food supply that come with GMOs compel farmers to plant vast monocultures of both GM corn, which currently covers about 84 million U.S. acres, as well as soy, which currently covers about 73 million U.S. acres. These vast monocultures push out room for fruits and vegetables and are ultimately worse for the soil than a diverse farm that practices crop rotation. Additionally, a study found that GM maize can cause liver and kidney damage in rats. These results, of course, were vehemently denied by big biotech and food companies. Finally, agribusiness giant Monsanto often harasses farmers into using their GM seeds, and if the farmers refuse, Monsanto could put them out of business. So clearly, the conclusions about GMOs are quite unclear. In debates as controversial as GMOs, both policymakers and the public really need scientists. We must be able to communicate the scientific facts about issues such as GMOs, so that both policy and public opinion can reflect the truth, and not a hodgepodge of myth, misunderstood science, and partisan-fueled hype. I'd like to thank the fabulous Catherine Talmadge, who's here today, the office of Senator Stabenow, Dr. Donahue and Dr. Neal, my wonderful fellow Hughesies, and my mom, for coming.
Oh.